Okay, so we're here with Jo Wise this afternoon to talk about middle schooling. And Jo, I'd just like you to start by talking a little bit about your understanding of middle schooling and, you know, the value of middle schooling and so on, if you wouldn't mind. Thanks.
Not at all. Middle schooling, in my experience, happens regardless of whether or not there's a framework for it. So it's really describing a period of time between, say, grade 6 and grade 9, where we think about what's actually happening to young people at that time, and we think about the way we're teaching them, thinking about our pedagogy, and trying to find the best ways to teach kids as they go through what is a really significant emotional and physical stage. So middle schooling is really what happens when kids go from being sort of young children, early childhood focused, to becoming really who they are as a little person, and then moving towards who they're going to be as an adult. So it's a significant time for brain development and personal and emotional development. So that's probably what middle schooling is, trying to target your teaching at that time of life.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're really focusing today on curriculum for middle schooling and you know, what would make an appropriate curriculum for middle years. And we're focusing particularly on this question of integration. So could you talk a little bit about how you would define curriculum integration and how this relates to a notion of transdisciplinarity for us?
Curriculum integration is something that sounds really large, but I think it's more the idea that in the reality, a generalist primary teacher, for example, maybe has 8 KLAs that they're asked to look at. So how do you possibly do that without cutting the day into 8 sort of periods, which isn't the way primary schools and particularly middle schools are generally set up. So the idea is to say, well, what is a day like for young people in those schools? Well, they might have to come to school, do some PE, they might have to go to assembly, some of them will be pulled out for music lessons. So what you're looking at is how do you bring together elements of different KLAs and still create a coherent teaching and learning experience. So what does the teacher do with the learners that covers or draws together components from each of those KLAs, not necessarily every KLA all the time, all at once. So you might find integration is about building a unitised program. So the whole school might be looking at the circus, but from year 7 to 4, there's really significant differences in the way that integrated concept is dealt with, dependent upon the focus that school wants to have at that time. Integrated can also mean just really thinking about the way you teach and what you're teaching, and trying to think, well, you know, the arts is a really effective alternative pedagogy because it really asks kids to think about how they feel, build communication strategies, build the group health. So is there a content area that really needs to be tapped into that might be difficult if you try and do that just with teacher talk or another PowerPoint or another handout or another video? So you're really thinking about, well, how can the way I learn, say, an inquiry method of SOS, how can I bring that into an area of science that might be really important and interesting, and can I then think about a way of enriching that through an arts experience as well? So integration is about planning for the best and most effective learning experiences. When it comes then to transdisciplinarity, it's really coming back to the idea of depth. So rather than looking at this huge big story of saying we have to cover everything all the time, teachers already make decisions about what they're good at, what they like, what they're confident in. So transdisciplinarity is about going, well, let's find some disciplines, some depth of knowledge, and really focus on bringing those depths of knowledges together. So not just trying to cover everything, you know, integrate everything to make it easier to cover everything. It's more about really being specific about what aspects of each discipline you think are critical. There's a lot of advice to teachers about that, about what is it we think is important in each KLA, and they're written currently in the syllabus documents and also now in the essential learnings and standards.
Okay, so you started off by talking about you know, why you think middle schooling exists, and then that second question around curriculum integration and so on. Why do you think integration and transdisciplinarity is such a good fit for middle years? Because I guess you could make an argument that you know, all curriculum should planned around an integrated approach, and yet that doesn't happen so much at the senior level.
That's true, and I think that's about the way young people learn at this particular time of their life. There's a fair bit of evidence that says kids kind of switch off school, particularly from about year 7 to year 9. It's kind of a grey period, and if you look at the neuroscience, there's lots of information about what's going on in the human brain in pre-adolescence to understand why school, when it's delivered in a very traditional way, becomes difficult for some of these young people. Not all young people, but some young people. So middle years transdisciplinary work and integration is about, can we make learning as rich as possible, as relevant as possible, as engaging as possible, and really start to recognise that there remains differentiation in those learners. Early years really allows kids to learn in ways that reflect what comes naturally, where their strengths are, and then we for some reason start to kind of focus more on the teacher and think about, well, how does this teacher like to teach? Whereas integrating and thinking about transdisciplinarity, you know, bringing the best of each discipline together, is about looking back at the learner and finding ways to keep the learner really engaged, make your contexts really rich and authentic and meaningful, and to really try and put the learner back at the centre of your planning process.